It was not news of a decisive victory which reached the White House, but it was enough of a victory and what Abraham Lincoln had been waiting for.
All persons held as slaves within any state, the people of which shall then be in rebellion against the United States, shall be then, thenceforward, and forever free.
Now the fate of the Union and the fate of slavery were one and the same. The spring of '63 found the war moving into its third tragic year, with federal troops deep in Confederate territory in the West. But once again, Lee's lieutenants were on the march in the Cumberland Valley. And in June of '63, the tides of war converged on a little town, which until then had been as peaceful as the seminary which stood nearby. A town called Gettysburg. Now two determined armies faced each other. 75,000 men under Lee, 90,000 or more under Meade. The hardened veterans entrenched on Little Round Top waited. The Union sharpshooters in Devil's Den waited. The fertile fields of Pennsylvania waited. But Lee's first assault failed to dislodge the Federal troops from Cemetery Ridge. Meade's men got what sleep they could among the graves that night. The fighting had been hard. And when morning of the third day came, Lee mounted his fateful attack. Pickett had sent his men charging across an open space nearly a mile in length. They had moved with the steadiness of a dress parade. Their defeat was one which all but sealed the fate of the Confederacy.
Now, in the midst of a tragic war not yet won, a lot of folks gather at Gettysburg for a dedication. And among them is the president. He looks older now, seldom smiles. War's been so long, so many dead on both sides. After a while, after the main speaker, he has a few words to say. He speaks briefly, quietly, of the brave men, living and dead, who struggle here. Says we must resolve that they shall not have died in vain. That our nation shall have a new birth of freedom. And that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.
But the terrible war went on, and once again the West proved crucial. Vicksburg had surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant in July of '63. Then Grant took command in Chattanooga and stormed the Confederate positions on Missionary Ridge. East Tennessee, the way into Georgia, was now in Union hands, as was the Mississippi River. The Confederacy was divided, and in Grant, Lincoln had at last found a fighting general. Now placed in supreme command of all Union forces, Grant threw the Army of the Potomac into the Wilderness Campaign. Slashed at Lee's line, was pushed back, struck again and again. The South was slowly being worn down by the better equipped and larger armies of the North, by strangling blockade on the sea. And once again, word came from the West. Federal victories there were opening the way into Georgia. And the way into Georgia was taken by William Tecumseh Sherman. Atlanta fell to Sherman in August of '64, and then began a 300-mile march to the sea. A march whose mission was to destroy the productive heartland of the South. A march whose mission was accomplished. The garden area of the Confederacy was laid waste.
In 1864, the rebels had enough of the war, and we'll all drink stone blind. Johnny, come fill the bowl.
The war could not go on much longer. Grant besieged Petersburg, and with Sherman's cavalry joining him, forced Lee to abandon his capital. It is April 3rd, 1865. Lee's armies are all but surrounded. 6 days later, two former graduates of West Point meet in a small house in a town called Appomattox. And Ulysses S. Grant, whose initials stand for unconditional surrender, converses at length with Robert E. Lee, who hopes for something better than unconditional surrender.
My men would like to take their mounts home with them for the spring plowing.
Yes, it's doubtful if they will be able to put in a crop without the horses they are now riding.
With malice toward none, with charity for all, let us bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations.